resisting. Reality bends.
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to the in-scaling setup for Cast and Crit Frost. I did say that I thought the character could get quite a bit stronger if you invested into int, but I also said it would cost a lot more. The reason why I started out the character with Elegant Hubris and the Caspero node that allowed you to ignore attribute requirements is because it makes your gearing way cheaper. It's greater on a budget, but when it comes to some investment, int scaling is just king. It's so hard to beat the scaling of int. I ended up taking my whole tree and scouring off the ES tattoos because once you have enough percent attribute scaling, the flat int actually gives more ES scaling. It was kind of funny scouring off the 3% ES tattoos and seeing the ES number go up. Now, what all changed with the character when we swapped to ES scaling? There are quite a few big upgrades. Number one is 8,000 additional ES. We were at 24k, now we're at 32. Another big upgrade is we are now suppress capped. Between 4 suppress tattoos I believe I have throughout this tree, this wheel here, this suppress while phasing, quartz flask that gives current permanent phasing and some suppress, and having suppress on our shield, that takes us to 100% suppression. So that's number one. Number two, we now have a recover on block shield along with much better block than we had before. 55 attack block and spell block cap. With recover on block previously, we were just spell block capped with like 25 to 30 attack block. So this is a sizable upgrade there as well. Then on top of that, we also swapped over to a damage taking conversion setup. Now I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking this is a Purity of Fire Sublime Vision angle. No, it is not. This is actually just doing about 70% damage taken as fire and going 90 max res into fire specifically. That also is beneficial in that it allows you to not have to force in as much res gearing. You do still need some decent res to counterbalance Tempered by War, but it saves you on having to get additional max res and it saves you a jewel socket. And this jewel does come with damage, right? 2 double damage nodes helps give you a decent amount of damage. Another option is going for the 3% more damage per power charge, but ultimately I like this more in terms of getting some nice tank, getting some damage diversion. This works really well against Shaper Ball Pen, which we'll showcase here against Shaper, as well as Lightning Pen from I think Storm Calls with Aziri, stuff like that. And it focuses on the most important res, which is fire when you're trying to min-max for taking on something like Quad Ghosted Feared, which is what I'd like to make this character able to do. The most dangerous thing in that mechanics or in those fights is the double Aziri Flame Blast. Now, another thing I want to go over is the fact that eventually, if we really get around to it, which I'm not making promises here because this is a ridiculous commitment, technically on the high end of this character, we can also get 10% of elemental damage taken as chaos, which would make our effective conversion for lightning and cold 80%, which is pretty dang effective, but that requires 4 hunter items. Right now, you'll notice my items have a bunch of influences, and you'll notice specifically there are 6 items with Elder, and only of those 6 items, only one of them actually uses Elder mods. The other 5 items, I have done this just to enable Bound by Destiny. We are in fact using the new jewels, Bound by Destiny with percent int and percent attribute, and then technically late game, if we could get it, elemental damage taken as chaos for 4 hunter items is an insane DR boost. The thing about that jewel is it requires, for our setup, it would require us to have a Elder Hunter influenced Mage Blood, which that's just, I don't even want to think about chancing a Mage Blood like that. Technically, they upgraded the bench and you could imprint do it, and I don't know, it just sounds miserable, but if we made an Elder Hunter Mage Blood, we could then go Tailwind plus Int plus CDR with Hunter on the boots and drop Elder on the boots, and that would enable a full set of Bound in that regard. But that's a little bit crazy, and I'm not going to think about that until I start getting real crazy, which I'm not sure if I will. Speaking of which, I did say at one point, hey, I don't want to get sucked into min-max projects, and here I am getting sucked into a min-max project. In my defense, I really like this character. This is one of my favorite builds I've played in a long time, and I couldn't help myself. I got sucked into it. So that's part of what's going on here. Another thing I want to say is I have been doing some thinking about it, and although I really like Occultist for the Elegant Hubris, and I think this is a solid setup for the in-scaling, the more I think about it, this is like shower thoughts, Lance talking here, I think Hierophant might just be better. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be leveling and testing a Hierophant because I am I am a sucker for making the best possible version of something. And my brain just keeps nagging at the thought of like, okay, if I trade this jewel for this jewel and I swap this ascendancy node, does that give me net benefit? And I feel like Hyro potentially could just scale a bit harder than Occultist will. So I'm going to be looking into that in the next stream here. But this is just to showcase, hey, if you're doing the Occultist and you want to min-max some more, this is something you can do. Of these pieces I'm wearing, we went for the triple stat helical, the 1 in 10 basically misting, where you're going for int plus attribute plus crit multi, and eventually if you want to get real crazy you can go for a 5 stat, but that's also just really psycho, not really a realistic thing to go for. And then the one thing that happened for us that was just insane luck is I was trying to make a mirror tier level chest. Well, actually I wasn't really trying to make a mirror tier level chest. I was trying to make a pretty good chest piece that eventually I was going to farm the currency to make it a mirror tier level chest, so that way people could have some free mirror service. And chat basically, I had one lock in my stash and they said, you gotta use it on the chest, and it actually rolled the 1 in 50 to slam T1. So we ended up finishing this chest piece way sooner than I thought I would. I thought I was just gonna have a bench crafted ES and I was just gonna play with that for a while until I farmed the currency. But this is there. If you want a free mirror service for a instack Twilight Regalia, just message me in game. I will service it. So yeah, that's another just side note. But yeah, anyways, that is the TLDR of the tree changes. I will also note, we do have one tattoo here, which I kind of think is a sleeper pick in terms of just a really all-around great tattoo. Runegraph of the Warp. If you slot this into any build that has any like duration-based buffs, it feels really good. It gives your duration, or the duration of your buffs, like another 40% duration, I want to say. It's pretty dang effective. Really recommend if you're using this in a character, or if you have a character that has some duration-based buffs. Fantastic little side note, and I don't think POB is importing tattoos or rune graphs correctly yet, so that's one thing going on there. All right, now, another thing I want to talk about, with all these changes, you'll notice we dropped a lot of power charges. We invested a lot more into intelligence. How do we make up for that crit loss? Well, there's a few ways we make up for it, and one thing I want to highlight is specifically a mercenary with Battle Mage's Cry. What does this do? If there is a unique monster next to your mercenary, which is a unique monster counts as 20 quote-unquote power, Battle Mage's Cry will give 2 base crit to everybody around. So basically he procs this, it gives me 2 base crit, and then that applies to my attacks and my spells. So that's one thing where we're making up for crit chance. Another thing is, technically, it also gets scaled by buff effects. So that 2 base crit becomes 2.4, and technically, I'm gonna stop saying technically, but if there's two unique mobs, it can go up to 25 power, which is 2.5 base crit, then scaled to 3. So it's in between 2.4 to 3 base crit. So that's one way we're fixing our crit, is Battle Mage's Cry. Another way is we're using a mercenary that has also Zealotry. Zealotry gives % crit chance, it generates Calm Ground when you hit enemies, and it gives you more damage multiplier. I decided to drop the mercenary with Determination, as I felt like this was a better route where we could get damage as well as get a Garb of the Ephemeral here instead of on an AG. Ultimately, I want to take this character to Quad Ghosted Feared, and I have no faith that the AG will survive in that level of content, but I do think that the mercenary will survive, partly due because you can put items like Defiance of Destiny on the mercenary, and mercenaries have just an insane baseline DR. It gets a little bit crazy for their survivability. So Zealotry gives crit chance. That's one of the other ways we're getting crit chance back. Another way is, I'm pretty happy with Cyclone, so I made the commitment to swap over to a Dagger, which has higher base crit as well. That also makes up for some of the crit loss. And then on top of that, we tagged in a Grand Spectrum, that gives crit chance, along with Endurance and Frenzy. That's one of the things we tried as well, to start making up for some of that crit chance loss. Now, besides him giving us crit chance from Battle Mage's Cry and Zealotry, we also are scaling his aura effect with some Zealotry aura effect. One thing I will note is I tested out +1 all spell. As far as I can tell, this does not apply to his Zealotry. It doesn't make his Zealotry more powerful. It was also just really lucky. I randomly was trying to recombinate Zealotry and +1 Abyssal Socket, and when I was rolling for Abyssal Socket, I randomly hit +1 all, and the Recombinator just kept it. So that was just a really lucky thing. But from my testing, +1 all spell does not actually benefit their Zealotry, so keep that in mind. You don't need this. It isn't doing anything extra. It just looks cool. Another thing we're doing is, you'll notice I put on Strength and Dex, and I'm forcing a lot of Strength and Dex. The reason I am doing that is for Mask of the Tribunal. part of the thing I'm trying to get is some decent attack block onto my character. So if I can get this guy to have some okay strength, with 600 strength, this thing gives us about 6 attack block. It's not anything crazy, but it's a nice addition to help us scale our block chance further. We also get crit multi from dexterity, and you'll notice he has 500 dexterity, which gives 40 crit multi as well. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to keep this late game because it is quite a bit of commitment on percent attributes here. It's commitment on attributes here. I might just end up going for like some zealotry aura effect scaling on the rings and the belt and just swap out the helmet for a minus max res or minus chaos res helmet, stuff like that. I haven't fully decided, but currently that is what is going on with Mask of the Tribunal. I like it a decent amount, but I'm not sold it is necessarily the best in slot. And then we have a Sap on Block shield with Recover on Block. We made this by doing Essence of Loathing until we got the other spell block, and then doing a Shaper Orb Slam, roughly a 1 in 10 to hit Recover on Block. So I made multiple shields where I went for spell block until I had a T1 spell block and then slammed, and that's what I was doing to get Recover on Block with the shield. This plus Defiance of Destiny helps the Mercenary feel very, very tanky. And the other things we have is Brittle Ground. If you can force him on top of the unique monster, that can apply Brittle Ground. This seems kind of inconsistent, but I think it's worth checking out. As well as we have Ailment Effect, which applies to the Brittle Ground, and the sap being applied from these sources. And then the other things are a Nerve on hit and some res. The biggest issue I have with this Mercenary right now is he does die to Reflect. So for example, if you run Fizz Reflect or Elia Reflect, this Mercenary will PK himself. So I'm going to try to work out some solutions for that. I was using Replica Alberons in the previous Mercenary setup, which that did work for solving Reflect. So I might end up swapping to that similarly as well with this one. We'll see. I haven't really thought that far in advance. All right, so that's the Mercenary. That's why we're doing those things. Now let's talk a bit about crafting. When it comes to the gear pieces here, gloves are the same as they are in the first video, so I'm not going to go over that. The dagger specifically is slightly different in that you're trying to roll alt spam for runic first, and then you're doing a combination of imprint on a cannot roll attack, a regal, a block, slam, annul, slam, annul, imprint. You get the idea. Basically, you're just repeating this step until you get damage per int. That's what I did. And then you are trying to do a suffix craft after the fact with basically veiled exalt or veiled chaos, depending on if you have the additional craft, as well as bench crafting, hits can't be evaded, and attack speed. That's the way I went for it. It was a bit scuffed. Not much I can say about it. Ultimately, if you're going to do Cyclone, just using the sword or the dagger is fine. Dagger only becomes slightly better than the sword, in my opinion, on Instack. On a regular, but when you're on Elegant Hubris, they're pretty comparable in my opinion, / maybe slightly better to have a sword. So you can make that judgment for yourself. The biggest difference between a dagger and a sword is the dagger can roll with some of the caster mods, as well as dagger has slightly higher base crit. The thing with the sword is the sword has higher attack speed, and the sword has a better implicit. Crit multi is just better than the crit chance. So there's pros and cons. The dagger cannot use Lancy Silk Sprain. The sword can. You can make your own judgments for that stuff. As for the Helical Ring Mist, this is a pretty complicated craft. I would just suggest checking out my video, my Gagarf guide video, and skipping to the timestamp where I go over Helical Ring crafting. I go over it in big, really in depth, and I'd rather you just watch that than me try to re-explain it here because it's just going to make the video way too long. Now, as for the other crafts, Lich's Circlet was a matter of getting memory strands on a helmet and then doing Sanctified, Fundamental, and Abyss Hollow Fossils to roll for percent int, flat int, and Abyssal Socket, and then use your Unraveling if you get like a mid-tier int that could maybe go to T1, as well as Orb of Dominance. And then do a Bristle Matron, Suffix Can't Be Changed, Scour, Block Mana, Slam, rinse and repeat to try to get yourself some ES prefixes. So that's the way we went about this helmet. As for the boots, we did an imprint craft with CDR for int and res. So you get your CDR first, then you scour it down to a magic base, and then you do imprint crafting to build back from elevated CDR. The reason we did this is because we lost CDR on Bound, so we needed to get it back somewhere. As for the shield craft, it was a recombination craft to get the suffixes, and then using a Bristle Matron prefix craft to get the prefixes. As for the body armor, I'd probably do Dense Fossil spam into suffix crafting after the fact, I think, was probably the best feasible option, where you end up bench crafting 6% attribute rather than having it be the Hillick unveiled mod. That's probably the approach I would take for the chest piece. All right, I think that goes over most of the gear pieces here. As for the clusters, these are just a matter of you do a fundamental fossil or reforged defense. Basically, you're trying to get 2 of your ideal mods and then do a 50-50 fracture. And then after that, it's doing more fundamental fossils or reforged defenses until you're hitting 3 semi-ideal stats. Right now, I'm using all res here and here. I eventually want to swap out of all res into full attribute scaling, probably. But for right now, it's helping me fix my resistance due to the reduced resistance from Tempered by War. So that's the cluster crafts. I think I explained most of the stuff going on here and what's going on. Oh, and then for Watcher's Eye, if I didn't cover it wherever I have it somewhere. I am doing spell block plus gain mana as extra ES and damage conversion. The most important stats there are the clarity gain is extra for ES scaling and the damage conversion. The spell block chance from discipline is decent, but this stat could be gain on hit. This could be regen. This could be a suppress Watcher's Eye, which can save you some passive point investment or overcap you in case you want to run Delirious content where they can put debuffs that reduce your flask effect. You have different options. You can make use of it how you will. Well, actually, now that I think of it, the suppress isn't an option because we're not running Grace. Technically, there's a way you could force in Grace and go for the evasion int mastery, but that's another story. Anyways, point is, I was just trying to say the most important stats are clarity and the conversion. You can make your own mind up about what you think of the various Watcher's Eye mods. All right, so I'm going to real quick cut in here because I forgot to do the showcase. I was going to do a quick Uber Shaper showcase just to give you guys a feel for the rough look at what the character looks like in harder content, Uber Shaper being the example. One of the things I would say about the character, one of the biggest pros of this character is its defenses, its ability to simply just kind of ignore content danger. But one of its biggest weaknesses right now is I'm not happy with my power charge generation. Right now I'm using Assassin's Mark, which you can see it generates fine when we're on single target. That's not an issue. Where it is an issue is if I'm just doing some just general mapping. When I'm doing general mapping, Assassin's Mark on and Mark on hit really isn't consistent enough, in my opinion, to give you those charges. So I would maybe say consider grabbing this wheel here. So you have charge on kill, and that would solve that. You'd have to give up probably these like ES nodes, but I think that's probably a worthy option to consider. Just something I've been noticing as I've been playing this character in the maps. You know, I just got it all set up last night, and so I haven't done a ton of testing. That is one of the biggest things I noticed in terms of one of the things my character is currently lacking, which is consistent power charge gen while just doing regular mapping content. Got a phase. Mind if we do. And I want to highlight when we're doing this Shaper how effective this mitigation is against Shapers. Like for example, Shaper has the balls he shoots, which gives pen. He gives it's like so much of his damage, and then having the damage diversion to fire and lightning heavily mitigates that. I also want to showcase like Immortal Call with a slam, how much damage that does. It barely even phases us. So our fizz hit is feeling pretty good, and then I don't know if I'm just landing every single block or the balls are literally just not doing damage, but for the most part, you're gonna be pretty immune to the vast majority of things, and that is really the goal. I still need to do some testing with Tormented Feared. But I think we'll wait to see where the Hyro is, because if the Hyro is straight up a better setup, then I would like to showcase that if I could in terms of the testing it. So that's one of the things I'm going to be looking into. I think I highlighted pretty well about the damage mitigation of this character, so I'm going to go ahead and clean this Shaper up for the last few phases. All in all, I am pretty happy with this character in terms of just, I've really enjoyed playing it and setting up the gear. Hopefully, for those of you who have been playing the character, you've been enjoying it as well with its you know, from the early stages or wherever you're at in terms of gear progression. Just know that when you see me testing out this Hyro setup, it doesn't mean you have to swap to Hyro, and I certainly wouldn't recommend swapping to Hyro on the earlier budget gearing, because Hyro to me makes sense in the late game. It does not necessarily make sense to me in terms of the earlier game setup with the power charge scaling. Like, the power charge scaling stuff works fantastic for the Occultist, but then when you start leaning less into the power charge scaling and more into the int scaling, that's when I think Hyro starts to make more sense. Hence why my brain is saying, oh, for min-maxing, this might make more sense as a Hyro. That's just all that's going through my head right now in terms of that stuff. Phased.
He's trying to recover. Hurry! Let's find a way back.
I don't know. Hopefully I'm explaining that well. Basically what I'm saying is play Occultist. Occultist is good. I'm going to try out a Hyro setup, and maybe it would make sense to do Hyro if you're going for min-max void maps. That's our end term goal. I don't know if it actually is better. It's just something where I need to test it, put it together to actually see if it is better. So next video will either be me saying, okay, we started doing voided maps, Occultist was actually just better, or hey, Hyro, this is where it's really at. It'll be one of those two things. So we're gonna find out. That's the plan, at least. To basically see which one really is up to snuff. I do want to do some of the hardest void maps. I think that'll be a lot of fun, and so that's where we're gonna end up taking this character. But yeah, that's a look at the Occultist. Back to the rest of the video. Hopefully you guys enjoy. I went over all this to showcase, hey, if I was going to do in scaling, if I was going to min-max the character further, this is roughly how I would do it. That being said, as I said before, my brain is nagging at me that Hyro might just be better. So I am going to pursue that thought and test out, now that I have an idea of where the Occultist looks like at a rough early setup, I want to set up the Hyro so I can get a comparison between the two to really get a better idea of whether or not that nagging thought has some merit to it or not. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one.